Welcome back to Unique Minds of the Okanagan. I'm Rob O'Day, and with me as always is Rylan Kinnan behind the camera. And today we're talking with Paul Crawford, who is the curator and director of Penticton's Art Gallery. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for inviting me along. I really
No worries,
look forward
brother.
to chat with you.
Why don't you introduce yourself and basically describe what got you into being
Perfect.
the runner somebody who runs an art gallery, because it's a unique choice of career.
And I think I probably have a bit of a unique journey to get here as well. I've been here in Penticton now this is my 16th year. I came here in 2006. Prior to that, I was in Grand Forks for 4 years, and prior to that, I was up in Wells trying to start my own art museum up there. And prior to that, I was in Victoria, had a little commercial art gallery down there. But really, the genesis of it all started back as a kid collecting bottle caps. And then I got from that into collecting stamps and then into collecting coins, but then I spent my coin collection. So that kind of defeated that whole purpose right there. And but what I loved about stamps was the history that they spoke about. And it was the greatest education I had as a kid. It taught me about geopolitics, about world history, and all these amazing things that you could learn through these little objects that, in this album, and you sort of look over them. And I kind of got out of that. And then but it was always the story of an object that kind of got me. And some of the early lessons I learned were, as a kid, I was in West Vancouver's Memorial Library, and I'd go in there, and there was this painting. And I remember the little painting, but what reminded me, what I remember the most, was that there's a story next to it. It was typed up and framed next to it. And the fact that the painting and the story were framed up to the same size gave, in my childhood mind, showed me that they had equal weight. That the object was nothing without the story, and the story was of equal value to that. And I remembered it. I didn't know who the artist was at the time, and I didn't remember anything about it, but I just remembered that visually. And later on, I found it was by Emily Carr, and the story was a little bit about her. But at the time, Emily Carr meant nothing to me, right? Mm-hmm. And then I had a teacher in high school who would teach us social studies. And as we were learning that, they would bring objects in of the time. So whether it was a couple of coins, maybe studying Roman history, to bring in a handful of Roman coins. And you could touch that tangible history to connect you to that time, and all that made it really personal. And I had an amazing art teacher who was a well-known artist. And not that I'm an artist, but just meeting him and understanding how he saw the world and all that. He was our biology teacher in high school. So those are the things that kind of stuck with me. But to be honest, my journey here, those were sort of the foundation things. But I was at UVic in my first year, and I went from a boarding school that had a very tight, constrained kind of lifestyle to having absolute freedom for the first time in my life. And the only class I passed my first year was an art history class. And the only reason I passed it was the fact that it was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday afternoon or something like that. And I loved the teacher, and I was really inspired by them. And so I always felt guilty if I missed it. And that was the only class that I passed. The rest of them were, I didn't complete the course. I excelled in social studies, but they don't give you marks for social studies at university. I threw great parties and promoted the clubs and all that stuff, but I just didn't show up to class. And so they let me back the next year, and the next year I wasn't that much more motivated to show up anymore. I did better, but I didn't meet the requirement, and I got kicked out of UVic. And so I went to Camosun College and was trying to decide what to do that year. My dad, who was an accountant, was like, "Why don't you get a real job? Forget all this arty-farty thing, right?" I'm like, but okay. So I took an accounting course, and I loathed it. But the thing I learned about the accounting course is that when the accounting course was, I discovered stamps again. And there was a stamp auction every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and that was when my 3-hour accounting class was. And it was like, I'm going to learn more about economics going to the stamp auction, buying these stamps, and because they have a catalog to tell you how much they're worth. And I'd buy them at this auction, and I'd see they're worth 10 cents in the auction, and and I'd buy them and think they're worth $500 or something. And so I blew my entire student loan buying stamps that year. Like, I tried to get a whole Canadian collection, and it was great. But then when you get to the rare things, they got really expensive, And so I had lots of stuff. And the economic lesson I learned out of that whole thing was, come January, I had no more student loan, and I was broke, and I took my stamp collection, which I had figured was worth all this money, back to the guy I'd bought them from, and he's like, "I'll give you like $300 for it." I'm like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Well, where did you buy them?" I said, "I bought them here." He said, "How would you pay for them?" I said, "I don't know, like $3,000. He goes, "Yeah, well, I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar. Like, that's what it's worth to me, right?" And I learned, anything that has a catalog that tells you what the price guide is to something, forget about it. Don't collect it. And I'm like, oh no. So I got my $300, and I'm like sitting there, and my girlfriend at the time was like, "I'm not carrying your sorry ass. How are we gonna, you better figure something out, right?" And I'm like, oh no. And so I took my $300 and I'm waiting at the bus stop in Victoria. It's March the 1st, 1990, and I'm like standing there, and there's a Salvation Army store behind me, and I'm like, this is what my life's coming to. I might as well look at what secondhand clothes are going to be all about, right? So I dragged myself into the Sally Ann, and I'm like, okay, this is my future, right? And I'm looking around all this used stuff, and I found this little photograph, and it was tied up in butcher, rope. And it was autographed on it. It was signed in the photograph. It was the guy in a suit, but it was personalized from the guy to whoever. It was like to Miss Lorna Risen, a real good secretary, and it was signed. I'm like, well, if this guy has signed a photograph to somebody, he must be somebody, first of all, and it must be worth something, right? So I bought that for $5. Came home, my girlfriend's like, what the hell are you doing? You just blew all your money on stamps, and now you're bringing home this old beat up photograph? And I'm like, I don't know, I think there's something to it. And I took it all apart, and I found on the back said photographed by Karsh of Ottawa, 1941. Joseph Karsh was one of Canada's premier photographers and photographed the rich and the famous and did all this stuff. So I'm like, wow, this is amazing, And so I wrote to Karsh, and I said, do you remember who this guy is? And he wrote me a letter back a month later. He's like, I appreciate you finding it and appreciating that it was my photograph, but I've taken literally thousands and thousands of photographs. I have no idea who this guy was. But I hope you enjoy it. And as a token of my appreciation, here's a signed self-portrait. And he sent out a little portrait of himself and dedicated to myself. And I'm like, holy cow, if it's that easy to meet someone of that stature, not a bad racket. And so I started buying art and going to auctions and picking up paintings, and every time I buy a painting, I'd track down who the artist was and go meet them, and it was incredible because all these people would have let me into their lives, and I met amazing people that at the time everyone's like, you really should keep a diary because you're meeting like really important people, and I'm like, they're just a conduit to information for me. Like, I just want to know who this guy was or who you are and what's the story about this painting. And so I started phoning up all these people, and people like Pierre Burton and Jack Shabolt and all these people that were 1 degree away from the foundation of our Western sort of cultural history here in Canada. Like, this is 1990. They're all in their 80s and 90s, and some were even over 100 years old when I'd meet them, and they'd tell me the stories of their youth and all the people they met, and Emily Carr, the Group of Seven, and it's like, wow, this is all really amazing, like first-hand accounts. But so that's how I started. I just started collecting stuff, and then I was working at Safeway at the time, and this woman had a hotel in Victoria, and she's like, you're in art, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, the guy who ran the gallery in our hotel took off last night and took all the art with him, and I got this empty space. Do you want to run a gallery? I'm like, why not? Well, I'll try it out. So I started I ran a gallery there for a couple of years and got involved in a bunch of stuff. And, and one of the early lessons I learned is if you show up enough, people just start expecting you to be there, right? Like, you belong. And so I started meeting a few people, and I would start showing up at these crazy parties, and people would be like, hey, you going to the big Sotheby's auction in New York next month? And I'd be like, I can't even afford to get to the ferry, like I can't afford the gas to get my V8 down the Pappy Highway to the Victoria to the ferry, but sure, and then people started giving me money and telling me to go to Vancouver and bid on paintings for them. And next thing you know, I'm standing in an auction house, and I'm like, I'll go $40,000 on that painting, and buying things for people. It was crazy, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I was learning, and every time I'd buy some, I'd go and meet the person who made it and find out about it. And so through that kind of way, I kind of through a back door got my way into, getting invited to apply for the job in Grand Forks for the first time, like 1998. And at the time, I really didn't know what I was doing. I'm like, I can't do this. And I just put it off. I didn't, I was just too freaked out by the prospect. And then in 2002, I got a phone call from my friend Richard Reed, who was retiring, saying, hey, look, we're posting a job again. I'd love it if you'd apply. And so I applied and got in, and and the rest is what they say is history. So that's sort of how I got into it. But it certainly wasn't through, I did get a degree from UVic, but at the end of the day, the best education I have is just phoning the people up that I'm interested in and pursuing those things. Why not get a first-hand source in someone else's, edited version in a book that they wrote, And so, yeah, and it's been an amazing journey. Like, it's been the greatest gift that I've ever had is just getting on the phone. And I wish I had, and the greatest gift I had at the time was my youth, because people would open their doors to me. I had no ulterior motive. I didn't even know who they were, like half the time they were just a conduit to information. I'd read a little bio on the back of an exhibition catalog or something. And, I remember like this one guy, Tony Onley, who's was one of Canada's most famous artists. And I read this little bio of him as I'm driving up to his house, you know, and the day I met him was the day his wife was moving out of the house. And so it was this chaos, you know.
Oh, wow.
The moving truck backed up and they're loading up the art and he's all stressed out and freaking out. And it's like, be careful with that, that's a $10,000 Komodo. And he's yelling at them and he's on the phone to his ex-wife. And she's like, no, I decided to go shopping today. So, you know, can you tell him to come by tomorrow? He goes, we've been doing this for months, you know, like today's the day, you know, and it's pouring rain in Vancouver. I got a truck full of moldy paintings I just picked up out of someone's garage. And he's up there freaking out. And then I just remembered he just like, he looked at the guy and he hung up the phone and he says, fuck it. Come on, I say that? Sorry. He said, hell with it. He goes, if you get to her house and she's not there, we plan this, just dump it on the balcony and just let her deal with it when she comes home, right? But she's being told that today's the day.
That's so
They
funny.
turned around and he said, you want a cappuccino? And I'm like, all right. And it was just brought me to his house and we became great friends, you know, and it was incredible that I had this incredible access to these individuals and this history, and I never did keep a diary. I wish I had, you know.
Right.
But I collected all this art, and I always figured that the art would be my diary. But yeah, age is a funny thing too. You kind of remember. It's amazing how much you do start to forget, you know, some of those details, those subtle things. And I did fits and starts. Occasionally kept a diary, so it's been interesting to look back and like, oh my God, I forgot all about that, or find an old article, you know, and it was. Yeah, it's just amazing. Just by showing up, the amount of authority people bestowed, you know, gave me that I was part of that club was incredible, you know. And yeah, just opened up so many windows. And I'd be asked to tour around the province, you know, with my collection and talk as an authority on collecting art and BC art history. I'd be like, all right, I'll show up, you know. Like, how much money do you need? I don't know. Bus fare is good enough. Like a touring musician, I suppose, you know. Just like, I was just so chuffed that somebody had an interest that what I was doing, right? And if I could inspire other people to do it, even better. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into this whole thing. And it's funny to see how much this industry has changed since. Not all for the better. Like now it's like the barrier for entry would be a master's degree to get into my position, right? And I don't know if that necessarily bookmark makes you really smarter, really.
No, and I was going to say, like, that's one thing that's highly inspirational about your story is that a lot of art directors are kind of put in that position because of the education they've gotten.
Totally.
Yours is, it's almost like self-taught and self-made, and you've created, like, you have a beautiful gallery.
Yeah.
You have some amazing artists that have brought their artwork here. Like, I think it was last summer you had an Aboriginal artist whose artwork was just phenomenal, and the entire room was filled with it. And
Buffy St. Marie,
yeah, and she had like the music, and like that whole exhibit was amazing.
Yeah.
And like that's just one of the exhibits that you've put on here, and you've had some amazing artists come through.
Well, I've been really blessed, and I suppose part of the thing for me is that, just for me, it's just like nothing's impossible, right? And sometimes having no money makes you more creative and the opportunities that you can do, right? So, like I remember in 2015, in 2014, I've always been interested in like, just the world is a small place. And I guess stamp collecting taught me that. It's just how small it is. And in 2015, I was kind of always curious about, everyone I knew had an opinion about what was going on in Afghanistan. But nobody I knew anything about Afghanistan, but everybody had an opinion, right?
Yeah.
And so 2014, and I'd been thinking about it for a long time, and so I just got on the internet and just started reaching out to artists in Afghanistan, like, what's going on there, you know, like, and I remember getting an email from a woman in, excuse me, in Berlin. She's like, who the hell are you? You know, like I'm getting all these emails from my friends in Kabul and just saying, there's this guy writing to us, wanting to know about our art, and I'll ask all these questions, and you know, they're all freaked out because the Taliban had just sort of left, and it's still risky to be an artist. And,
fair
and
enough.
so she was coming out to vet me, and so we chatted, and I said, I'd love to just tell their story. And so she acted as a conduit, and we did a show, 100 paintings from Afghanistan with, 20 artists. 11 of them were women, 9 of them were men. And then I paired that up with a Canadian war artist who had done 2 tours of duty over in Afghanistan and had those 2 exhibitions, looking at each other in very different views. The thing that I found really amazing about the artists from Afghanistan was how young they all were, because they had basically cleansed an entire generation of intellectuals. And then just their materials, they were painted on bed sheets, nothing was square, everything was like all these crazy sizes, and they were just making art with whatever they could. The men we're doing traditionally like studio work, sort of looking more at Afghanistan's cultural from a historic standpoint, and sort of looking at it in a romantic kind of view.
Yeah.
And the women were all doing really political art. They were most of them were street artists, and they were out, you know, and you have all these views of what the world is like there, right? And here they are out on the streets of Kabul, just doing, you know, very political works in the open, you know, and it's like, wow, talking about having some cojones, like that's not only putting yourself out there, but you're a woman putting yourself out there on the streets, you know.
In a very dangerous area.
Yeah. It was amazing. And then from that show, I thought, well, where else can we go and look at it? At that time, Syria was just getting crazy. And I just like, wow, how come nobody is stepping up to do anything about this situation? Like, you know, when Libya happened, we were there in weeks. You know, Muammar Gaddafi's like, let's deal with it right now. And everybody went over to help out those people, right? Syria is just falling into more and more chaos. And so I found a guy on the internet, this guy Humam, and he's like, yeah, I'd love to do a show. And so we worked on that, and it was incredible. We brought 100 works from Syria. We had to smuggle them out of Syria. Like, it was incredible. Afghanistan was super simple. They just took them down to the Baghdad Air Force Base, and FedEx took them over here. Like, it was like I had ideas about shipping them in pieces, and I'd put them all back together. I had no idea. But from Syria, it was a totally different deal. Like, he had to actually travel from from the capital Syria over to Lebanon, where he had to do a wire transfer, then send the money back to him, and then he shipped all the stuff out to us. But we've remained friends since. That show toured to over 16 other galleries across Western Canada.
Oh, wow.
And we did this whole mail art show. He's now living in Berlin. He got out of Syria about 4 years ago. He's living in Berlin, and we did this international show that started here in 2020, called You're Not Alone, looking at COVID, the first 6 months of COVID, and trying to connect people. We had over 300 artists submit works from every continent except Antarctica, and I tried to find someone in Antarctica.
Right.
It didn't work out.
Just find the one scientist who paints.
Couldn't find anybody. It was like, rats. But, you know, and then that show, we shipped it to Berlin, and last September he put on that show in Berlin, and it's like, anything is possible if you got the willingness to make it happen. And, you know, in this summer, we got, you know, Buffy St. Marie, it was a last minute show. I phoned her up, and well, actually, I'd been thinking about Buffy for a long time, and I was at a book signing of hers a number of years ago, and I said I'd love to do a show, and never heard from her. And then last spring, I'm in Peachland, and I go to the Value Village there, and there's a portrait of Buffy St. Marie that some guy had put together, and I'm like, oh, my wife really likes Buffy St. Marie. Maybe I'll pick this portrait up. So I bought the portrait, and I put it in my car. I go down to the Pharmasave or Safeway or whatever on my way home, and I'm in line, and there's Chatelaine magazine, and who's on the cover? Buffy St. Marie. I'm like, oh, that's twice in one day.
Yeah.
And I got back to the gallery, and I'm like, I need a summer show still. What about Buffy St. Marie? So I emailed off to her agent and got a phone call the next day, and in 6 weeks, we had, I'm on the phone with her in Hawaii, and we're shipping works, and we're getting a virtual tour of her studio. The next thing you know, we got, like 60 works show up here, and we got a show. And not only did it start here, it went to Winnipeg after that, to a gallery there. And actually last weekend, it opened up in Calgary, the Canadian Music Centre in Calgary, the same show that was here. And that whole thing came about in 6 weeks, and now it's taken on a life in two other galleries and goes on, which is amazing. And
it's a beautiful exhibit.
Yeah, and then the Christmas time, I'm down in Mexico and went to Oaxaca. I had no expectations. Walk around the street, see all this incredible political street art. I'm like, this is some incredible stuff. And I, bumped into a couple studios, and next thing you know, we're working on a show up here, and we're going to have a major show here of Mexican street art here this summer.
And what days are those?
So it opens here on July the 8th, but as of tomorrow, June the 24th, I got 2 of the artists flying up here to help do some printmaking workshops here and sort of share their knowledge. So a big part of the ethos of these guys down there is to give people the tools and the skills and the knowledge. So a lot of them go out to Indigenous communities and to other underserved communities and do workshops. They take some of the more promising students in those workshops, bring them back to Oaxaca, and they do a residency at the studio there. And then the idea is that they go back out to their communities, teach the skills to other people, and so on. And so as a result of that, they had like 2 studios in 2006 when this whole uprising started. And now there's over 70 studios operating in Oaxaca now, full art collectives.
That's crazy.
And it's amazing the power of what people can do if they come together and they're invested in things and community. And that to me if there's one thing about this whole racket, I hope, and it's like all the things I do is about building community. Like I don't know what transferable skills I have, but the one thing I'm being blessed by life is I've met a lot of amazing people. And if I can bring people together and see the magic they make, that's, for me, is a reward. It's just sort of, this is a wonderful vehicle to get stuff out there and try and inspire people. And you know, it's just my own worldview, right? It doesn't mean that you have to just have an opinion. Yeah. Come in, you know, indifference is the worst thing. Like it or hate it, but if you walk out of the door and you don't remember a single thing you saw, then it's failed you. But it doesn't mean that's a wrong answer, right? You know, there are no wrong answers. Like whatever you think is perfectly legitimate. And my view of what I like is going to be different from yours. And not every show I put on, I necessarily have to like it. Yeah. I just need to have to stand behind it, right? I have to, you know, and I have to be open to learning myself. And there's many times I've put on a show here because I think it's relevant or culturally, you know, pertinent to our time. And I've come out a different person at the end of it. I came in with one attitude, and I came out with an entire different worldview. So I think you got to be open to that. And I think you got to sort of realize that, yeah, I guess that's one thing I hate about this industry is the way that they've kind of separated. And I guess it's some survival. Like if you hold the keys, then you know maybe everyone else feels that they need to. You have to be valued in some way to get access to that information. Yeah. And I find that it's done a huge disservice. Like it's created a wonderful industry within itself. But if people don't feel like, if I don't feel comfortable walking into a gallery, then why the hell would the average person walk off the street to that gallery? Like, you know, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why do we need to make this thing into some sort of deified place? Like, just get people in the door, give them the confidence that whatever opinion they have is going to be correct. Yeah. And trust that they're open mind. They've got an open mind that they can make their own opinions on things, right? You can lead them on and say this is what the artist intended, but at the end of the day, you're going to take out your own interpretation, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I find it really, that sense of elitism, really unfortunate. And part of it's market driven, and unfortunately that is a nasty side effect of this industry, that there is that market driven thing. Like an Andy Warhol painting selling for $195 million is absolutely absurd. Like it doesn't 100%. Make any sense in any situation, anywhere, at any time. Like it's absolutely crazy. But what it does do, it makes everyone else who has an Andy Warhol painting that much richer. And that's the whole thing. And the art market is this entirely unregulated financial market.
I think we were speaking with Ariana about that, were we not? About how it's not a conspiracy theory anymore that the art industry is completely funded by the black market. In a sense that the only people who can pay to afford fine arts are people who have illegal money or laundered money.
But that's
and it's crazy.
Well, it's true on the high end of it, but the reality is, like, there has never been a better time to buy art than there is right now. Like, and that's a double-edged sword too, because a lot of the stuff that I've collected and could afford to collect, I bought through auctions and other things. You know, I bought things from friends and all that, but you know, like the reality is, I can go to an auction or I can go to a thrift store, and I can pick up a painting for the less of the cost of the frame. And you know, it could be historically significant or by someone of note, right? And it already has that cultural weight attached to it. Like I don't have to, you know, prove to you this person was significant, because there's already volumes of publications and things that already tell you that this person was significant at one time. Yeah. And in that regard, like the problem is, as I was saying earlier, like when I started into this collecting, like we started going to auctions in 1990, I was living in Victoria. Victoria had an Antiques Row, which was 4th Street. There must have been like 80 antique stores on like 6 blocks. Yeah. It was packed. There was 2 auction houses, and each auction house had 2 sales a day, or 2 sales once a week. So there's 4 auctions a week. I would go to them all, and I would always be the youngest guy. They'd be packed. The place, it was an event every you know, Tuesdays and Fridays or Thursdays, whatever days it was, and it was packed. In 2019, I went back. Antiques Row is maybe down to maybe 4 antique stores left, you know. The auction house is down 1 auction house, and they were doing 1 sale a week rather than 2 sales a week. I was still the youngest guy in the auction house, and it was a third of the size of what it was. And stuff I couldn't afford back in 1990, and you know, I can afford today, not because I'm making more money. I'm probably making less money than I was when I was working as a union employee at Safeway, making $21.65 an hour back in 1993. It's like absurd to think how much money I was making. Like, It's like, wow, and here I am, not making, but now everyone's either downsizing or dying, the people I was collecting against. And there isn't the people to buy all that stuff, so it shows up. And you got this whole Maria Kondo thing about let's just get rid of stuff that means nothing to you, right? And if you don't have any cultural context to it, then of course it's not going to mean anything to you, right? Yeah. So that's the whole thing. So there's all these amazing things that are available now that you can pick up for nothing, and if that's the cannabis for the art world, like if that's your entree, then maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable going to a show of your friend, or the on the line sale at the garage show at UBC Okanagan and spending $500 on something, That's not an insignificant amount of money, but but yeah, it's just, there's never been a better time to get into collecting, and the accessibility is totally there. And so it doesn't matter what the top end of the market is. The only reason it's the top end of the market is you got people with a lot of vested financial interest in those items. And that's the problem, because people then think, because this thing's only worth $100, that it's only worth $100. That's totally bunkus. Like it's just, I hate, it's like the barter system's only so good until you put a value on something. Like if you had 4 chickens and I had an old beat up car that I wasn't using, and I needed the chickens, you needed the car, and we traded, that was a great deal.
It makes sense.
And then I go away and somebody says, you traded that car? It's like a $1,500 car for those 4 chickens. Are you an idiot? Now I feel like I got ripped off, right?
Yeah.
And so it's an unfortunate thing that people put the value that you bought it for at the thrift store as to what that thing is worth. And the value is really much more than that.
Yeah, there's a really fine line between, I think the best way to describe it is Pokemon cards.
Yeah.
People don't realize how we paid like $6, $7 as kids for a pack. And now one of those cards is worth like $2,000.
You should go to Value Village as a whole, their Magic cards there, right? The whole pile.
Yeah, and like that's the thing, is we don't realize the value of certain things. Like another way to represent it is like Gibson guitars.
Yeah.
Everyone always thinks Gibson's so amazing and the greatest thing. Gibson isn't handcrafted anymore. They're manufactured in factories, so their value isn't as good as it used to be.
But the
and
brand
they'll still charge you the same amount, $5,000 for a guitar that's not handcrafted anymore. I'm good on that, thanks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I think the art world kind of has the same thing, where you're looking at like Banksy pieces as if they're like Da Vinci, but in reality, Da Vinci was using oils and different techniques and stuff. And I think that the art world itself has become, it's a lot easier to become a famous artist now because of social media. I think the painters and artists that we all look up to historically kind of had to build themselves to that point, right?
Yeah.
Through the failures, through just the
But
difficulty.
I think it also gives artists a false sense of, I think the art world was a much more global community back in the 1930s.
Yep.
The 40s. You had fewer artists, but they interacted much more often. Like you would have these national shows, everybody would travel, those shows would travel. There was a lot more connectivity and on a face-to-face basis, in a meaningful way. And I feel today, like going online to research an artist, it's a lot harder to find somebody who's had a career in the last 20 years because it's all on their website and people think it's going to be there forever. But if you don't pay your domain, it's gone, right? And because people aren't printing things anymore, there isn't the critical writing, like you don't get an arts column in the paper anymore. There isn't this volume of material that's out there to document your career. So you may think you're doing really well. But if a museum isn't collecting, like there's museums out there that collect art clippings, like archives, like reviews of people's shows or things like that. But if that stuff doesn't get to them, then your career is going to be ephemeral as much as your art is. And if you're selling it all online, you'll never have enough work together in one place that anybody can make an assessment of what it is. So you could have one painting show up, because eventually everything's going to show up somewhere on a secondary market, right? So if it like one painting can show up in Toronto and somebody can say, oh, it's a great painting, but I got nothing I can measure it against. So I've got nothing to look at it. So was it a one-off thing? Did they get lucky? Or, is this part of a larger body of work? But I can't find anything about this person. So how am I going to make a judgment? Yeah. So the value of it will be based upon the fact that nobody can find anything else about you, right? So, and so you could send all your stuff all around the world, but it doesn't, at the end of the day, there's nothing there that'll be, have any weight in preserving your legacy.
So do you think that instead of sending it out, just hosting like like maybe traveling with your pieces and doing small galleries and exhibits would be smarter for young artists or aspiring artists?
You know, the challenge right now is that there's fewer galleries and too many artists. So to get into a gallery is going to be difficult. To get into a gallery in Toronto, not only you got to beat out the 10,000 people who are in Toronto trying to get that space, you got to show a reason why someone from Kelowna or Vernon or somewhere else deserves that space, right? And it will probably come down to saleability. There'll become a whole bunch of things that gallery owner or curator is going to be looking for, right? And so you got to figure out how to position yourself. And I think, you know, the problem starts at the schools too, because everyone forgets that a university is a business, right? Like you go to university, you're in the fine arts program, it's to their benefit to keep you there as long as they can. They're not necessarily giving you the foundations. They're teaching you great things about how to write about your art and think about it theoretically and all that. To me, that's a job of a curator or other people. Your job is to make the art. You know, learn the skills, get the tools, create art. And that's what I loved about Mexico, was like looking at the work down there, the craftsmanship. These guys work on the craftsmanship. And it doesn't matter if it's a disposable piece they're going to paste on a wall or it's a piece they're going to sell in a gallery. They're going to put the same care and attention ensuring that the print that goes on the wall is of the same quality as the one that they sell through the gallery. And just that care and attention to the tools. Because I find a lot of art schools these days and a lot of places, you know, you got a great idea and you write something really great about it. You get out there, you got the one-hit wonder, but where do you go from there? Because you don't know how to actually make, you knew how to make that really good, or you knew how to sell it. But now you can't just do that one trick every time, you know, that's going to have a lifespan. But where do you go next? Like you don't have the fundamentals of knowing how to draw. And if you look at Picasso and all these people, you know, whether they drew realistically, they learned all those skills, and where they ended up was a result of a long journey that kind of evolved to that. But beyond that, they could still fall back. And a lot of those people went back to doing representational work or something else because they realized you can only abstract something for so long. You can only go, like if you're a minimalist artist, you can only reduce your canvas down to nothing, you know, and then where do you go from there? You can only sell one-way canvas, you know, it's like, great, that may be a great statement, you know, but how many of those are you going to sell? Like, you know, and so where do you go from there? And I think we've done a lot of artists a disservice selling them on the idea that, you know, there are these opportunities. And I find, you know, we produce a lot of wallpaper, and I find, you know, I think the art should be represent a barometer of the health of a society, the arts in general, whether it's music and all that. So if you look at the 1950s and the 60s, people discovered the power of art to change an entire society. Some of it was contrived by the government, but I think a lot of it's been usurped by powers that be to dumb down ourselves too, right? Like if you look at pop music and all that other stuff, and you look at a lot of the art that's out there, it's pleasant, it placates us, it makes us feel good about ourselves, but does it push the boundaries of things anymore? Like,
or thought? No.
Yeah, like that's what I love. I'm not a huge rap person, but I'll give it to those guys. They're out there pushing it, you know, they're pushing the limits to it still, you know, but a lot of radio friendly stuff, it makes you feel good about yourself, but it's just pablum, you know, it's like.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's just, I like to call it like the McDonald's of music. It's like pop music and radio music.
And it's not to take away from it, it serves its purpose, but I do think we're not here I don't think we're by mistake. I think people realize like, holy cow, you know, you had Dylan and all these people, Buffy St. Marie in the 60s, and they're like, rallying against the machine, and it impacted an entire generation.
It did.
And wow, the power that those guys had. And if you look at any sort of country in the world that's going through social upheaval, the arts are the one that are pushing the limits, right?
Always, every revolution has been pushed by the arts. There hasn't been one in history that I don't think wasn't pushed by.
But as much as they can push the art, they can also quell a populace as well, right? And I think, you know, I think that we are in that thing. And there's two artists, Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons, whose work I loathe, right? But if I really think about it objectively, their work is the vacuous nature of their work is, I think, an incredible reflection of the society in which we're living today, especially a Western society. I love, like, I think Indigenous arts is where it's at because they are pushing it. They're doing so much, and that gives me great hope, you know, and I hope that will spill over to the rest of our society. But I think that's where the power lies. And for me, a lot of the most powerful work today sits with our Indigenous communities. And that gives me great sort of hope for the future and excitement, right? And it's like,
we're in a really unique time, especially for I feel like we're on the verge of like this global awakening, but no one really wants to wake up. It's like kind of like when you wake up in the morning, this moment, but like, and then all of a sudden you finally wake your eyes. You're like, okay, I get up, make a coffee. Like, we're just there, but not quite. And it's like, I'm waiting, really curious to see what it's going to be.
For sure. And we're in a real bubble here in North America too. Like, I think it's easy to think that this is how everywhere else in the world is.
Oh, it's not,
right?
though, not even close.
And you go, even going to Mexico is like, wow, like,
we're
people
very secluded.
People are like hanging out. The village square was super important in that sense of community and people hanging out and socializing with each other, even in COVID, you know. And
there's a disconnect with society. And
the breakdown of society and the isolated states that we're in, and I think it was bad before COVID. COVID certainly was the best thing that could have happened for making that even crazier, right?
Yeah.
And I am hoping that people realized how valuable art and culture was to their lives to get them through COVID. But I still think that we're in for a struggle, you know. And if we can't get people under 40 really fully investing in our art and cultural community, and not just sort of showing up, but you got to also support it financially.
There's like the local history.
Yeah.
You can't lose history, whether it be art or knowledge, right? Like it becomes a fine line where if we lose our arts culture, then we basically lose who we are as human beings.
Totally.
Because we've literally had arts since cavemen. Like we've been drawing on the walls since cavemen. Yeah. It's in our DNA since the day we crawled out of the ocean
for sure.
to basically be creative. And I feel like our society is creating the next generation that is coming to not be creative.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest fear is like what happens when art doesn't exist anymore because it's all, you can see it online.
Or robots can paint it, you know. It's sort of like, but I do believe it's that sort of that dumbing down of our society that, you know, like I do think it is, and so we get rid of that critical thinking aspect of it. Like it's always the first thing that gets cut from education, you know. It's like art and music, you know, and it's proven time and time again that people who have a musical education are better critical thinkers, right? You get better mathematicians, you know, like you may not think you're good on paper, but man, you can figure out those quarter scales and stuff.
Yeah, I didn't realize how good I was at math until I actually started dealing with numbers.
Totally.
And then I'm like, oh wow, okay, maybe I'm not so stupid.
And there isn't a single human being alive on this planet, it doesn't matter if you're a monk in a cave, who doesn't have a musical soundtrack to their lives. You know, like everybody is affected by the arts. Like the arts impact you every day of your life in some capacity, whether you like it or not, from reading your cereal box in the morning or whatever.
Putting shoes on, that's a piece of
they're
art.
all, I think we're super dismissive of the impact on our lives, like somehow, and that's a brilliant thing too, that we've been taught that we don't have access to the arts, right? Like I think it's incredible whoever has
created that
narrative that the people believe. But then again, Trump told the whole nation that, you know, he won the election, right? So anything is possible. So, you know, nothing should be surprising anymore. But I always am amazed that, people are like, oh, you know, I'm not an arty person. Well, do you listen to music? You know, do you have pictures on your wall? Do you like...
I think everyone's artistic.
Everybody is, you know, and it's incredible. Like nobody remembers who won the shot put in the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, unless the guy who won it, his coach, or the town that he grew up in that now has a shingle out saying the 1988 World Shot Put thing. And what sort of legacy does that have? Like it's great for nation building, but you know, a painting or a piece of music you've created on that CD could fall behind someone's radiator, and 100 years from now, assuming they still have a way to play it, could put into their thing and still get that charge that someone listening to today has, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't believe it, just go and put on a great piece of classical music. You don't have, or go to Vienna and look at the Venus of Willendorf.
Yeah.
This little sculpture that everybody reveres, but you know, nobody really knows what it was all about. We've put on our own idea that this was some sort of sacred thing. It could have just been some dude making a portrait of his girlfriend. You know, like, who knows, right? But it is the amount of reverence we give on that Sistine Chapel, like all these things, like the awe-inspiring nature of it all. Don't tell me art doesn't impact your life. Like you travel, you seek that stuff out. Even if you go to an all-inclusive resort, you're probably taking in some sort of creative thing or running to the airport buying some tchotchke off some guy on the street. But you never know, that guy could have been the most well-known person making that thing you bought home as a souvenir. But for you, it'll always be a souvenir that you bought off the street, because that's how it was. And that's the problem with historically with Indigenous art here. A lot of them didn't buy into the commercial gallery system. So they would sell it on the street, or they sell it in craft stores. And so people always treated it as craft or lesser art. But at the same time, you know, they could have been the most revered artists from their nation, right?
Some of the best woodworkers on the planet.
Totally. But because how you got it, how it came to you, will impact how you see it in a cultural context. You know, it's not a souvenir, it's a souvenir or something, right? And we got to switch that up.
Yeah, it's true. I think the outlook on arts communities in general needs to change. And I think that that's the main point of the show, basically, is to like showcase what hidden talents actually out there, and not just in our region, but like look into your regions. Like, look into Vancouver area, see who's there, see who's hidden. Like,
just show up, just go out, you know, don't.
There's like, if there's a show, an art gallery on a Thursday night, spend the $5, go see, because you never know what you're gonna find. And I think that's,
well, 20 years ago, you'd go to a club, pay $5 and have no entertainment, right? You not $5, you pay $10 to get in.
Just to get to a club to listen to music and have a drink.
Yeah, or just get in and realize, how come there was an hour lineup outside, there's nobody in here, right? It's just like, oh wow, okay, well, that lineup made me get in here, now I'm in here, I might as well stick around.
So I think that's the thing, is artists just need to hire 10 friends to stand outside of the venues and act like they're in line.
Totally. And one of the things I love is, like, I don't know if you've been through Princeton lately.
No, I haven't.
Okay, when you're driving through, just pay attention to the big sign, welcome to Princeton. It doesn't matter which way you're coming in. And like, I had to stop and do a U-turn, because the last time I went through there, it's like, Princeton, welcome to Princeton. It's bronze sculpture capital of Canada. I'm like, holy cow, that is a lofty thing to say. Like, you're the bronze sculpture capital of Canada. So I kept driving, got over the bridge, and they, you know, where the Dairy Queen is, there's that big green space down. I'm like, I just thought it'd be littered with sculptures. Like, the whole, didn't see a single thing until the end, and they have like that archway to come in from the west side, and there's like a bird, but you would miss it, you know. And so I had to turn into town and like, where are all these sculptures? And you know, there's maybe a dozen that I could see in there. Maybe a dozen's generous, I don't know, but there was a few, but it wasn't what I would say the bronze sculpture of Canada. You know, I go to the Art Gallery of Ontario, they got more Henry Moore sculptures just lying out on the sidewalk than I think Princeton does, right? But I love the fact that they put it out there. And I would love to say that the Okanagan sells itself as the cultural capital of British Columbia. You know, like Nelson has got away with it for far too long, you know, like, because nobody's ever challenged him. So
and that's true.
It is.
But it's like Nelson is like really, like, it takes a while to get out to the Kootenays. And then once you're out there, you're kind of like, what am I going to do with myself? Like, and
it's super remote in the winter. And it's not to say that Nelson doesn't have a great...
No, I love the Kootenays.
It's a great artistic community. But I just love the fact that everyone, it's a de facto thing. If you claim it, then it's, if you claim the title, then you've got the title kind of thing, right? So let's challenge them. And I think we got as many good things in our community here that we should challenge them.
I'm curious, on a smaller scale. If, let's say I wanted to go open a small gallery in like a shop or something like that, do you have any advice in regards to like time you want to have, like what would be a good time allocation associated with like art being on display in a sense, like, because obviously you want it to be there for a good time with customers passing through. I don't think it could be on an individual per basis thing, but do you have any insight on that kind of stuff?
Well, it's really this is a challenging thing. Like back in the, traditionally an art gallery would have exhibitions. It'd be like a month-long or 2-week-long shows of a single artist or a group of artists. And I don't think we're in that economic market that can survive anymore. Like, I don't think there's enough sales, and that's a real problem. And it's easy to see how galleries can get behind the 8 ball, and you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, like, you don't sell anything for a month, but you've had to pay all the bills and everything else. First painting you sell, you know, you pay the bills, but now you're already behind, and that you never to catch up. And so in Victoria recently, a gallery just had a whole problem with that, where they had to close. And it is this age-old problem where artists lose all their inventory because they consigned it to a gallery in the middle of the night. They closed up and left. A lot of galleries today survive because they have framing. They're framing forward, it'd be nice if you could have like a back space where you could do your framing and have a front space that'd be separate, so it wasn't, you weren't hanging the art in the framing area, and framing being your primary source of income. And then the exhibition sales would be sort of gravy on top of that. And then, maybe you could build a client base that you could then go around and sort of flip the switch on that and be more focused on sales and less on framing, or farm the framing out to somebody else. It would be a perfect thing. Or putting on events, having maybe once a month you have like a, electronic dance party or something like that, and run a little bar in the back, and at least that covers your rent and your hard costs for the month, right? And allow you to go by. It's a different market today than it was 10 years ago, certainly different from 20 years and 30 years ago. Like and that's where we got to get people under 40 realizing the value of their homes, buying stuff. Why spend $500 from IKEA? Because it's easy, like on a framed print that is only going to be disposable. Like, spend the $300 on an artist who's a local artist, right? And you don't necessarily So to open a gallery today, you have to have you got to either be independently wealthy, I think, or you got to have like some other means to augment your income, whether it's putting on events or something like that, because the gallery model right now is going to be really tough. And considering we're going potentially into a recession and stuff, it's going to be even tougher. So you got to have some other way that you can carry the load, because it's not the best possible time. But it's something that we do need. Like, we've got more artists today than we have places to exhibit. Like, it's so difficult, and I think here with, like, there are venues, like there's art councils, there are lots of local opportunities for artists, but even still, there's still probably 10 times as many people that want those spaces for the spaces that are available every year. As a public gallery, it's a hard thing for us. Like, I do feel part of our role is to introduce our community to a larger narrative, whether it's global, provincial, or regional, and sort of try to bring in other shows and introduce people and make those connections to the other thing. If you're already somebody here in town that's showing your work a lot around, it's difficult. What benefit it's going to be for me to do something unless I do like a retrospective or do something like that that's a long-term thing. It's certainly, there are some challenges I see, but that's just me. Like, I can't speak for all curators. I can only speak for my own sort of what I think the important part of my role is. But for me, I really believe, I like to try opportunities to showcase local artists, but more importantly, I like to introduce our artists to a much larger network of artists and try and get their work or get them connected to people further afield that would allow them to grow as individuals, and it can be really easy to become a big fish in a small pond. And I think in the music industry here, it's amazing to see people who can make a career of it. I think there's no greater gift an artist can give themselves is to say that they made a living off their art at least once in their life, whether it was for 6 months, for a year. If you can make it longer, great. But at least you tried. You'll never know. Never be sit there, I wish I'd done it. If you're able to do it and you're able to take that chance, it may work. It may not, but you'll never sit back and think, I wish I had done that. And it's great that people can do it. You can make a great living locally. But I also sometimes wish I'd love to see these people get out of here and wait and measure themselves up against all these other road warriors that are out there. Like, it may not always be fun, it may not always be pleasant, but you never know. And the one thing I've learned about this industry, it doesn't matter what the art is. It's not a just thing. The cream doesn't always rise to the top. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to a whole bunch of things. Some of it's going to be luck. Some of it's going to be good timing. A lot of it's going to be somebody who's got some sort of that can lift you up to some other level, right? And generally, I hate to say it'll be around financial gain. Especially in the music thing. If somebody can sell your album, you're going to probably do well. If someone can sell your paintings, they're going to really push you more than somebody who may be technically more interesting and maybe a little edgier, but their work is not going to sell as easy. And so it doesn't mean that person is any less of an artist. It's just, unfortunately, the economic world that we're living in is kind of made that a little bit more difficult for you. And so, and that's where I think sometimes for us, as a public museum, we kind of have an onus to show those artists that aren't commercially viable, but who have something really amazing to say, right? And or push the limits on things and maybe switch people's viewpoints on things, and I've working with artists with disabilities. I've got an artist who's got cerebral palsy who's doing a show here coming up. And they have limitations on their technical ability to draw. If you saw their drawing just as it was with no context, you might think of it being one thing, right? But then when you put it in context and you realize how incredible that story is, you know, and how amazing that object is, it gives it, it enhances it in a whole other way that goes beyond what you might originally think about without that context. And so,
and that also breaks a limit too, because like, it's kind of a weird world where, like, for example, like musicians, people are more wanting the musician and less of the music nowadays. So they want to see you on your social medias, how you represent yourself, who you are, what you act like. They don't really care about what you write. And I feel like the same kind of concept is happening to artists now, where it's like you have to have a social media presence, and it's less about the art you're creating and more about the brand you're creating. And that to me is, I think that's the one downfall to the arts culture, is it's we're always forced to have to capitalize on it, I guess.
That's a whole other crazy thing, and that false sense of a career that you could have online, and it may work out with streaming views and stuff, but yeah, what's the longevity? And the other problem, especially in music, you know, I just love watching that Woodstock documentary, right? And just like, first of all, just the filming, like who does those film angles? Now, who's gonna film somebody's foot? You know, I just love the aesthetic of it, is incredible. But those performances, like who performs like that anymore? Not many people. Like
Richie Havens does Freedom live. He makes it up on the spot, and to see a band genuinely just like create something on the spot is
Santana
magic.
Out of their too, because they are on another planet, but they are so in that moment. It's incredible, you know. And then look at like, is it Zeppelin is like kind of happy, you know the bands that you thought would be really great are like, but Richie Havens coming out there,
it was just absolutely insane. Like,
just that footage of him is incredible. My favorite part of the whole thing, the document, like I love that, but I love when they, you know, when he's sitting there and he's all the guys all cocky on his motorbike, and his buddy's like, we need to talk, and he goes over and they realize they just lost their shirt. Like they push the fences down, they're coming in. And he comes back, and his partner's like just losing his mind. And he comes, the cocky guy comes back. And he's like, "So what are you doing about it?" He goes, "Well, we'll worry about it on Tuesday, right?" Like, who cares? The train's left the station. There's no point sweating it now because the money's already gone. The show's got to go on, right? And I love the power. Just sort of that. And I think I need to remind that's powerful for me because, you know, our festival in Wells or the new festival we did down here. Sometimes you get hung up on, I wish I'd sold more tickets or whatever, right? And who cares? We're all, you know, it's like getting on a charter flight to go down to an all-inclusive resort to Mexico or something. It doesn't matter if you paid full freight for the flight or I got a seat sale at the last minute. We're both on that plane. We're both getting the hell out of Dodge. We're all both gonna have a great time. And whatever we paid at the time was worth it to us at the time, right? And so who cares what you paid? Doesn't matter what I paid. I'm not gonna ask you because I know I'll probably get upset, but we're gonna have a good time. Let's just focus on that. And so I think, you know, for me, that was really a valuable thing there. But I just that performative aspect, you know, and we just gotta get back to that where we're really engaging people and in that moment together for that common shared experience. And you know, and I think we got to get away from just that manufactured content that we're being fed. Like there's no chance for, just like you go to a big concert today, like everything is so choreographed and light cues and everything. And if you're not there at that moment, you're going to miss the cue and you're going to throw everything off. Like how, you know, go off book once in a while, like see what happens. Like the magic happens when you're just trying to figure it out on the spot, like Richie Havens, like throw it out there. You got to quell 250,000 people. What are you going to do? All right, let's figure this out. And he does it. Like I can't imagine what that would have been like, but what a trip. And you know, you see him playing gun off stage, just walking to the back of the stage, and he's still just giving it. It's like, we need to put that energy into everything, right?
Everything.
We need to just ignite people's passion for whatever, like for something. Like I think that's one thing we're lacking.
Passion.
Is passion, you know, like, and it makes it easy to bulldoze things, you know, like, and it's not big C conspiracy stuff. It doesn't matter what you want to get away with it. It's the more apathetic we are and the more sort of we become just sort of stuck in our ruts and in our silos and on our computers and stuck on our phones and disconnected from each other, the more you're going to get away with. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's like, You know, the gas thing. Nobody should be surprised we're at $2.15 for gas. They've been telling us for 4 years, 10 years we're going to get to there, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Well, we finally got there. You know, we all knew it was coming, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't really, you know, we need to just, and that's what I love about Mexico and these artists. It's like, you know, and these artists in Syria and these guys in Afghanistan, they got nothing to lose. So
they appreciate what they're given.
Let's go for it. There are no limitations, you know? Let's live in the moment. We got nothing to lose. We got everything to gain.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we've lost a lot. Like
true.
I just think from everything, like as growing up as a kid, you know, see you at dinner time. You know, all right, where are you gonna be? Who cares? You know, like just be back for dinner, right?
It's true. Lights are on. You're home.
Yeah, exactly. You know, now it's like 10 minutes you're out the house, like, oh my God, I got to find out where Joey is. You know, on the cell phone, it's like, hey, where are you? I'm at the end of the driveway. Oh, okay, good. You know,
It's true.
phone me back in half an hour. Tell me where you are. I'm at the end of the block. Okay, good. No problem. You know, like.
If you had any advice for aspiring young artists that wanted to actually do it as a full-time career, what do you think the best piece of advice for them would be?
Just do it. Just do it and hammer away at it. Like, just make things happen. Like, create community. Create a community with you and your friends. Create, like, whether it's a communal gallery space, like a collective or something like that. Lift each other up. Don't worry about who might be getting the press this month or whatever. It'll all come around. You know, a rising tide floats all boats, right? Yeah. So maybe you're the art star this month. Maybe next month will be mine. Maybe it'll always be you. But in that whole thing, let's all lift each other up, right? And I find the commercial part of the art thing and the fact that it has become so competitive, whether it's music, visual arts, or whatever, you know, there's fewer opportunities. So you got to create your own opportunities, right? And so if you're going to be worried about that and that, you know, somebody got a show, like when artists, I know musicians are so protective of their gigs, you know, like, oh, I can't tell you where I played in Calgary. Well,
yeah, there's this weird thing with bands where they're afraid to share their fans.
Yeah, totally. Like how many times do you play in Calgary in a year? Like maybe twice. So like, who cares? There's 365 days. So you know, like you only have 2 of those days. So maybe one of those days I'll get that gig. You know, and
there's a definite. There used to be a playful competition between things and artists, and I feel like that there's
and a camaraderie, right?
Yeah, like a keeping it to yourself now, which is almost.
And these print collectives, what I loved about them was like at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter that this may be this person's image.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter was they all carved the block.
Yeah.
You know, and when they print it, they just sign it with the collective's name, so it's the property of everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I guess one thing about it in a band, if you want to create band harmony and have longevity, share the writing credits.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter if you're the star, if you're the drummer in the back, it doesn't mean you contributed in many ways. Like you're running the show, you know, you may be the person setting the whole time up, but because you're not on the writing credit, doesn't mean you shouldn't get any less of the pie.
Yep.
You know, it doesn't matter if it's 30 to the writer and 20 or whatever. Just make sure it's even. Make sure everybody's got a bit of it, right? And don't be so worried about, you know, what you might be giving up, and by giving up something, think about what you're gaining. And I think as a general rule in our society, we've become very much an I generation where it's all about what am I giving up or what am I losing or what am I gaining, rather than what are we all gaining, right? Let's all figure out how we can support each other. And you know, you bring 5 friends to a show, another person brings 5, 7 to a show, we do a shared bill. You know, at the end of the day, we got 25 people there. That's all that really matters, right? Mm-hmm. And if any one of us did it, we might only have 5 people. So let's figure this thing out, and how do we get people to part with their money a little bit more and realize that there's value to these investments, that it is, you know, like even a bad night out of live music still going to be better than a crappy night of Netflix, right? Yep. Just idly flipping around. Like, I'd sooner have that and pay $5 and go and see 5 bands that, you know, and I'll never walk out. I always hope this, if the first half I'm not, and the only time my patience is worn is electronic music, because I know if I'm not into it now, I'm probably not going to be into it an hour from now. Yeah. But at least with a live act,
it changes.
It changes. The second half might be a lot better, you know, and maybe, who knows? So, but I think we just need to build a community around supporting it. So whether it's like you and your friends create a space and you do a weekly jam or something like that, it'll catch on. If you got 5 artists, rent a little space and run a gallery, and maybe every 6 weeks you can feature one of your artists in your collective right there, but you're all sharing the weight. And when you have that show, the monies that you come from it go back to support everybody. You know, it's not about, oh, I sold it all, so I'm carrying all the weight. Well, that may be true this time around, but a year from now, nobody might care about what you're doing now. But Jim over there, he just sold out his show, right? So let's support that. So yeah, I think there's great hope, but I also feel we're on this kind of, like we're in a bit of a dark age too, right? I think we need to turn the ship around, but I do think the arts are what are either going to save us all as a society, or they're going to sink us, right? Because it's that whole sort of thing. So with luck, we can figure this all out and we can make it happen. And I'm excited at the potential that's out there, and I'm really excited about what I see what's going on. And certainly, Indigenous arts I think are going to lead the way, but I think we need to sort of all work together to create something amazing. And we need to get people who have felt traditionally disenfranchised on board and fully invested partners on this journey, because collecting art and being a supporter or a patron of the arts isn't the purview of white old people, right? It's of us all, right? So, you know, and you don't need a lot of money to be able to build a really good collection, you know? You don't need, you know, you can fill your home with all this. And if you don't like it 6 months from now, taste things, people change, you evolve, you know, pass it on to somebody else. But just, you know, trust me, if you put art in your homes and you listen to music on a regular basis and go seeking out new music, your life is going to be way richer and way better and way more fulfilled than if you don't. Like, there's nothing more depressing walking to somebody's house. There's just white walls.
Yep.
You know? Yeah. Anyhow, you probably need to wrap up.
I definitely want to thank you so much, Paul, for being part of this. That was an extremely eye-opener, because we've talked to a lot of artists, but not somebody who does the business aspect of the art world, right?
Yeah.
So
but everybody could have access. Like, it's never been more accessible than it's now, and that's the beauty. Just do it. Like, everybody can be a part player in this game, and you don't need a lot of money. You don't need any knowledge. All you need is the willingness to put out a bit of money and to be open-minded and trust that whatever knowledge you have is correct. So go for it, please.
All right,
so
everyone.
Amazing.
Awesome, thanks, Paul.
And thank you for all the amazing work you guys do.
Oh, no worries, brother. Well, we will catch you guys next week and see you again. Thanks for coming by Unique Minds of the Okanagan.
Cheers.